Hello and welcome to Senior Solutions, where we bring you topics affecting seniors and their loved ones. I'm your host, Mindy Felinton. Some of you have probably heard about hospice, and those of you who haven't, you're going to learn a lot today about that. But for those of you who have heard about hospice, there's so much confusion about what do they do, when is it appropriate, how long is somebody there? And my guest today is Joy Sexton, and she's here as a director of the hospice program at the Jewish Social Service Agency. I actually got that out. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here.
I appreciate it. And we're going to call you Joy.
Yes, that's fine.
And if you would, start out, I guess, by telling me, what is hospice?
What is hospice? Well, many people think hospice is a place. Hospice is really a design of care or a method of care or a type of care. And it is care for people who are at the end of their lives as defined by some kind of specific criteria and guidelines for different diagnoses.
May I ask, I'm sorry
Sure.
to interrupt you, but if
Sure.
I don't, I may not remember
No problem.
my question. So can you share with us a little bit about what those definitions would look like?
Sure, I will, but I think I'd like to describe kind of what the kind of the philosophy of hospice, and then
Okay.
I'll go into those.
All right,
Is
perfect.
that okay?
Great.
So hospice is also a philosophy of care. It is when people have decided to forego further curative treatment. So someone who might have cancer and they've been through a number of different protocols, and their physician has said, you know, there really is no more chemotherapy that we can give you. It might be for someone who has, any type of kind of chronic illness that's approaching the end of its span. And the hospice program is really designed to provide care from an interdisciplinary team for that person's terminal diagnosis, for the diagnosis that the physician believes would be that diagnosis that would bring about the end of their life. And they have to kind of prognosticate that they're looking at about a 6-month period. However, at the end of 6 months, if someone has not died in hospice, we don't throw them out. They continue to remain in hospice as long as the person continues to show evidence of decline and worsening symptoms. But hospice care is about providing relief of physical symptoms, of emotional distress, of spiritual distress, of caregiving stress by providing the care of an interdisciplinary team comprised of nurses, social workers, volunteers, hospice aides, and chaplains. And so that team works together to develop a plan of care for a patient to meet all of those needs in those areas. And we provide the care wherever people live. Hospice, some people think of it as a place, and there are some programs that have a hospice house or a residential house or a general inpatient care facility. But every hospice has to provide what's called routine home care, which is what the majority of hospice care is provided in this country, is where people live. Where people live could be their private home, an apartment, assisted living, independent living, and in nursing homes, which is often a surprise to folks. So people who are at end of life in nursing homes are entitled, if they have Medicare, to receive hospice care.
And if they don't have Medicare, what?
Most private insurances have a hospice benefit. Medicaid has a hospice benefit that mirrors the Medicare hospice benefit. And if patients have no insurance, we do provide care regardless of people's ability to pay.
That's good to know.
Yep.
And what is the time frame that Medicare will pay for? Is that, as you were saying, that they're either declining or they...
Hospice continues to provide and pay for Medicare continues to provide for hospice as long as a patient continues to show evidence of decline and we keep them enrolled in the hospice program. So generally that means that patients are also not going back to the hospital for treatments. We're not doing aggressive treatments. We stop drawing blood, which isn't to say we always stop drawing blood or we stop administering certain treatments, but we begin to evaluate kind of the benefit and the burden of something. And so if we draw blood and we're not going to do anything specific about the result, why draw it? Why create the pain there? Let's deal with the symptoms that arise and palliate the symptoms. And so that's really what certainly our nurses do, is they're experts in end-of-life care and palliating patients' symptoms. And social workers are experts in end-of-life care and dealing with families and their issues, and certainly chaplains, spiritual issues around end-of-life.
And is there special training that your interdisciplinary team must go through in order to become qualified to work in the hospice setting?
Some people come to us with hospice experience, and for those who don't, we provide an intensive orientation and mentorship program with other clinicians for that time.
Okay. And what is included in hospice care? What exactly are those things that you're providing?
The things that we provide in hospice care are the services of our interdisciplinary team, all of the nurses, the chaplains, the social workers, the hospice aides, and the volunteer coordinators just to provide volunteer support. In addition, most insurances, especially including Medicare, they mandate that what we pay for are all the patient's medications related to that terminal illness at end of life. We provide all their durable medical equipment, and that includes hospital beds, bedside commodes, over-the-bed table, walker, wheelchair, Hoyer lift. We provide medical supplies for if somebody has a wound, so dressing supplies. Our hospice aides bring in basins and urinals and whatever else they need to provide the personal care to the patient.
Okay, great. I had heard something about the fact that hospice can also provide care in situations where someone is still getting treatment. Am I misunderstanding that?
Well, it isn't really clear. Right now, Medicare won't pay for both. So if a patient chooses to go on and have chemotherapy, the cost of the chemotherapy would need to be borne by the hospice program.
There are situations where people are still undergoing care that they haven't necessarily totally given up and have chosen not to continue with treatment.
That's true.
Okay.
That's true.
Okay.
We often consider it kind of on a case-by-case basis and look to see where the patient is at and evaluate them from a symptom standpoint. And really, what are the goals of care? I think that's really, and for us, the goal of care is for someone to have a comfortable death, for families to feel connected and feel together, and for people to have a sense of spiritual and emotional peace. And then really the work of our program goes on as we follow family members for a bereavement period of 13 months.
What does that look like? Tell me about that part of the
bereavement
program.
part of the program, again, it's nothing that Medicare pays for. They just mandate that we do it, and it's a good thing. Our social workers follow patients who have been active with them in bereavement for the first 3 months by providing phone calls, visiting with them, or inviting them into the office for a meeting.
You mean the family members?
The family members,
okay.
Yes. Did I say patient?
You did,
I'm
but
so sorry.
But
Yes.
they could be considered the patient, so I just wanted to
Well,
clarify that.
the family becomes kind of the client after
Right.
the patient dies. And then at about a 3-month period, we figure that those folks are kind of ready at that point for support groups, and so we have a number of support groups that we direct them toward. But for the first 3 months, they're not ready to join support groups. The grief is too new, it's too raw. They're not really ready to listen to other people's stories, because right now their story is so important to them.
I sort of have I hate to interject my own story, but I have a semi-hospice story. This is years ago. I lived in Florida. I have no children. My dogs are my children, and I had a dog who was very sickly, and he died. I'll try to tell this very quickly. He died, and it was devastating to me because I had dealt with all of his medical issues, and he was so young. So I went to hospice, decided to start this grieving group for pet owners. And I went to that, and the person who was running it suggested that my grief was too deep and not ready for the group.
Not ready for the group yet.
So when you're talking
about a little
about
bit more work before you're ready for the group.
Right, so that really resonated with me about the fact that perhaps now that makes sense.
Right.
That you're not ready right away when
Right.
you're dealing with a loss to
Right.
have your own time to deal with your own issue.
Right.
So could you share with me a little bit about what distinguishes
Jessa Hospice from other hospice programs?
Correct, because there are many other hospice programs.
There certainly are. And
throughout
I
the
really
county.
believe people should make informed decisions, and they should investigate any provider that they choose and ask some good questions.
What are some of the questions that people should ask in determining that?
I think you might want to know that there's a dedicated medical director. I think that you would want to know what the ratios are of staff to patient caseload. I think that you'd want to know about the folks who are providing the bereavement support. I think you'd want to know something about the qualifications of the people who are employed there. Are they all RNs? Are there some LPNs? You know, what model do they use to provide care? Our hospice program has found that we can provide the best hospice care to our patients when our staff do not have an overwhelming number of patients. And for nurses, that ratio looks like each nurse has about 12 patients, social workers about 22, 23, and chaplains at about 30 to 35. That's well below the national average and below some of the other local hospice providers.
What is the national average relative to those
It's
ratios?
about 15, but I think some of the other local providers are hedging up toward 18 to 22. The follow-up that family members need, if they're not there during the visit, our staff always calls the family after the visit and makes sure they know what's going on with the patient. That's especially important for families that live far away or patients who are in nursing homes and families don't visit maybe as often. That's an important part. The other thing that Jessa Hospice has that I think is very important is we have a program called the Transitions Program. And it's a program for people with life-limiting illnesses, patients who are not at end of life, but whose lives may be looking at a year as opposed to a 6-month period. And we provide volunteer support. It's a free program. You don't have to, it's not a medical-based program. You don't need to have a physician's order to enter into that program. It's all volunteer support and coordinated by 2 individuals who visit the patients in the program about once a month and report back to families. They're very good at having a discussion for people who just can't get themselves onto the hospice page, in helping them come to that place and understand more of what hospice is, dispel some of the hospice myths, and make people feel good about kind of moving over into the program. If they choose our program, and we do give them a choice of hospices, if they do move over and stay in our program, they keep their same volunteer.
Okay.
So there's a piece of continuity of care.
Great. Well, we're going to take a short break right now, and we will be right back.
Hey everybody! Heart disease affects 1 in every 3 women in America, but you can fight back. There's no time to lose. Mothers, sisters, daughters, families, and friends, it's time to shout louder, stand stronger, and demand change. Let's go!
To the Batmobile! Dang it.
To the invisible jet!
Dang it.
Together, we can put an end to heart disease. It's time to go red for women. I could use your help. Yeah! Learn more from the American Heart Association at www.goredforwomen.org.
Hello and welcome back to Senior Solutions, where we bring you topics affecting seniors and their loved ones. I'm your host, Mindy Felinton, and I'm joined today by Joy Sexton, who is the Director of Hospice at the Jewish Social Service Agency. And I did it twice, so I'm so proud that I didn't stumble.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah. And before the break, you were talking about the Transitions program that you have.
Right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
The nice thing about the Transitions program is that patients sometimes graduate from hospice. Sometimes with our care and diligence, patients improve with our care, and we have to discharge them from hospice. And if they have a volunteer, we like to be able to discharge them back to our Transitions program. It kind of keeps them within an arm's reach, and if they begin to decline again, then they can re-enter hospice, because patients can leave hospice if they decide that isn't what they want, or if they decide they want to seek other treatment or curative treatment or more radiation or more chemotherapy. They can certainly do that. It's not like if you use it once, you never get let back in the door again. The other thing I was kind of talking about was one of the things that are different about our hospice program. And probably one of our biggest points of differentiation is that we're part of a social service agency. We're part of a large organization that not only supports our caseload ratios, which are very important to us, but also has the backing of a deep social service agency to help families with other issues that may arise as a result of the Child and Family Program. We have Premier Home Health for people who need to hire private duty help to help with personal care when someone needs 24-hour attention, because Medicare doesn't provide for continual care or what they would consider custodial care. We do provide hospice aides to help with the bath, but families often feel the need to hire extra help to help them out.
But that would be something they would have to pay for out of pocket.
They would have to pay for out of pocket because Medicare does not cover that piece completely.
And what are some of the other services that the
And
agency provides?
JESSA provides an extensive child and family counseling and support services, senior services. So sometimes if we have a family whose grief really seems protracted and ongoing and not being resolved, then we would refer them along with other providers, but to JESSA for that level of support and counseling.
Now, are all of those other services that you're now talking about, those are not covered as
They're
part
not
of
covered as part of Medicare, but they are. But JESSA accepts almost all insurances, all but I think one, and we're one of the only mental health providers that does.
Does hospice offer 24-hour care?
No, that's custodial care. Hospice does not provide constant care 24 hours a day for families. Part of what we do, a large part of what we do, is we are teachers, because we are teaching either facility staff or families how to care for that family member at end of life in their home. And so we're experts at teaching. We're experts at teaching families how to administer medications, how to position people, and how to personally care for them.
But I think what I understand you saying earlier is that you do actually have registered nurses who come to
And they make
administer.
visits. Our nurses come and make visits, stay for a visit, do some teaching, assess a patient, evaluate their symptoms, and then they go on to another visit.
So who is administering the medications beyond the family members? I mean, if there's medication for palliative care, pain management.
Say someone is struggling with pain and the pain medication is ordered every 4 hours. We might be giving a dose while we are in the house if the patient is due for it, but other than that, it rests with the family. And we teach them. We teach them how to administer it. We teach them about side effects. We teach them what to look for, and what to report to us. We're available 24/7. You know, we are, in fact, our office is closed more hours than it's open, but we're not really closed. We always stay open 365 days a year.
With regard to when is the best time, or when does somebody start thinking about my loved one or myself
Right.
may be appropriate for hospice? What are the things that we should be listening
I think
to,
that
or-
everybody should be thinking about their advance directives and really thinking about what's important to them at end of life, what they want and what they don't want, what treatments they would want. If they could no longer eat or drink, would they want a feeding tube? Those kinds of questions answered and thought about before you're in a place where you have to make a decision. People make much better decisions when they're planned
Oh, yes.
versus, and I'm sure you know that,
Yes.
than when they're kind of backed into a corner and then have to make a decision. Well, for different diagnoses, for different illnesses, there are different things that would be flags. But
Well, let's talk
certainly,
about those.
Okay, let's talk. I mean, the first one kind of that comes to mind is someone who has cancer. So someone who's not receiving any more chemotherapy and radiation, and the doctor is willing to give a poor prognosis or to say that someone has 6 months or less to live. For someone who has, say, dementia, which is quite common, and we do take care of patients with dementia, that would be someone who's no longer able to feed themselves, someone who is, for the most part, non-communicative, non-ambulatory, at the end of that disease, where their lack of eating will probably be part of what contributes to their death, or their inability to swallow would contribute to their more rapid demise, if you will. There are people who just are dying of old age, who lose weight, who become kind of less involved in their surroundings, seem to be retreating more, sleeping more, not eating all of their meals. But heralding sign would be weight loss, and a pretty significant weight loss. There are different diagnoses for people with qualifications for people with cardiac disease, with respiratory diseases. But someone whose health is really beginning to decline and families are concerned, we can always come out and do an informational visit. We do those free of charge. Obviously, we just give information, evaluate someone, talk to them about where they are, and see if they might be getting ready for that place. But hospice brings such support to people, and people often wait until it's too late. They call us at the last minute. And the real beauty of the work that we do it can't be accomplished in 3 days. We can pace things together and we can bring about the best end to someone's life that we can. But the interdisciplinary team and the work of the interdisciplinary team doesn't really get actualized unless you have kind of enough time. And interestingly enough, about a third of our patients who come into our program die within the first 7 days.
Because people have waited too long.
People have waited too long, or they just, or they didn't kind of see the signs. They didn't reach out for an assessment early enough. But I think sometimes family members watch individuals slowly decline, almost cell by cell, in a way that's almost not recognizable to them. Do you know? And suddenly they're.
For example, can you give us an example of what?
I think maybe someone who has what we used to give the diagnosis of debility, which is somebody who is just slowly, their multiple systems are not working as well as they used to. They're not eating as much. They lose weight. Well, they've lost weight, but gee, I kind of didn't notice that mom wasn't moving around as much, or that she's sleeping most of the day, and so I think sometimes those changes happen so slowly you don't realize what point has been reached.
Well, and I guess it's a fine line too, as a loved one,
right,
to clearly know.
And I think it's hard. That phone call to hospice is hard. I think there are many myths surrounding hospice.
Well, what are some of those myths?
I think that some of the myths are that hospice care hastens people's death. In fact, that's not true. A study, I think from 2 years ago, showed that patients live longer when they're in hospice. Part of that's due to the fact that we come in and we often take away a lot of medications that patients may have been taking that at their age or at their state aren't necessary, and people perk up and do better.
I have
their
heard that as well.
I think that people think that we come in to kill patients and that we bring narcotics with us, and think that we're going to administer lethal doses of medications. That is not true. We don't bring medications with us. We titrate medications. Our philosophy is start low and go slow, especially if we're dealing with an elderly population that's going to be sensitive to medications. We titrate medications, meaning that we increase those very incrementally to the point where we get whatever the symptom is that we're trying to control, whether it's pain, shortness of breath, nausea, respiratory distress, that we get that symptom palliated within control, and then we hold, and then we may advance later. We also use lots of non-medical therapeutic things to try and relieve symptoms as well. But
For what would those be?
Music therapy. We have a volunteer program that we have massage volunteers. We have aromatherapy volunteers. Many volunteers who do different things for people. And
do you have pet therapy?
We do have pet therapy. In fact,
all right,
we have
I always love that.
We have a number of dogs. In fact, our dogs have little baseball cards. I should have brought them for you. That people get to kind of look at and kind of pick out the dog they'd like to come and visit them.
Ah,
It's pretty wonderful. But back to the myths piece, I think it is people feel like hospice is a death sentence and that it means giving up hope. And it doesn't mean giving up hope. It really is reframing that hope. If hope for a longer life is not possible, what is important? Is it to get to a bar mitzvah? Is it to make it to a wedding? What are the goals of care for the patient? What can we do to help them maximize every day that they have left on planet Earth?
the Jewish Social Service Agency, is that limited to people of just the Jewish faith?
No, it is not. We are a non-sectarian hospice provider, skilled in dealing with all different cultures and honoring customs and traditions, including patients of the Jewish faith, but patients who are not of the Jewish faith. About a third of our patients are not Jewish, about 2/3 are. In terms of chaplaincy support, we do have a rabbi on staff, in addition to having a Christian chaplain who provides support for those. In fact, they provide support for both sides of our patients. So,
What would those circumstances be that, beyond what we've talked about,
that would bring somebody back into
Correct.
hospice? A rehospitalization, a redecline. Sometimes I think if you think of how someone who is older, and the majority of our patients are older. In fact, the majority of our patient census of 99 patients is over 85 years of age. A quite high percentage. But patients as they're declining sometimes start a downward turn and then plateau and level off. And we never know whether they're going to continue to kind of decline or whether that plateau will continue. Sometimes that plateau continues for quite a while. For diagnoses like dementia, for debility, those are hard diagnoses to pinpoint an end for. So if someone improves and they leave hospice and then they start choking again, or their swallowing becomes an issue and they're not eating again and they begin to lose weight, that would be the time that they would come back in. Or if someone's left to receive a chemotherapeutic therapy or radiation therapy, and then they want to come back into hospice after that's done, that's certainly fine. We do certainly bring people right back in.
And how are your services paid for? In other words, I know that some insurances and Medicare pays for that, but you obviously provide services to people who perhaps don't have those, or they're not covered services.
Right.
So how do you...
JESSA provides hospice care regardless of people's inability to pay. They do have to fill out an application for financial consideration. And once that's provided, then we provide the care.
So there's no restriction?
No, we don't provide less care to anybody who doesn't have insurance.
No, I meant as far as the gamut of the same time frames, et cetera.
Yep.
There's
all of that applies.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And what do you feel is the single most important thing that people need to know about hospice that we haven't talked about?
Well, I think mostly to know that it's not giving up hope, and that it's not a death sentence, and that often family members will call us and they will say, I don't want you to mention the word hospice to my mom. I don't want you to mention it to her. And that's the patient who we will get later who will say, don't tell my daughter that I'm dying.
Yeah.
So, I think people try to protect each other.
Right.
And our staff is very good at bringing people to that place of understanding.
And reality.
Right. But reality in a time that's going to work for them, that's going to work for the family. But I think that we're there. We really are. We're there 24/7. And we provide great support to patients and to families. And it's joyous work.
That's
really
great. And no pun intended with your name. I know you changed your name for that. If someone wanted to get more information, Joy, and get in touch with you, how would they do that?
They would just easily call our office. Our offices are located on Montrose Road. They can call our main office number. I'll tell you the number.
Yes, if you would.
It's 301-816-2676. And that rings directly into our hospice program. And just ask to speak with somebody in our intake department.
All right.
We have 2 terrific people in that department.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really found it very informative. If you have any ideas for a topic you would like to see on Senior Solutions, please feel free to email me at seniorsolutionsTV@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.